This is Rick Rule for Sprott Media. One of our ongoing programs in terms of investor education is something that we call Know Who, which is what we're doing today. Most people, when they think about investing, think about the techniques in investing, securities analysis, fundamental analysis, things like that. Things that are referred to broadly as know-how, knowing how to do an investment. In the small side of the resource business, the people are as important as the projects. And we've launched this series, Know Who, in an attempt to get to know the people behind the successful resource investments that we at Sprott have made over 40 years. We believe that the lessons learned by leaders, the way that they've built their businesses, the way that they've built their teams, and how those lessons have resulted in their own success as investors are important for you, our clients, to learn. We also think in every circumstance that the lessons that have been learned by the entrepreneurs who have built businesses worth hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars and have later been implemented for their own success as investors are lessons that you can learn and follow and can use to enjoy better success in natural resource markets going forward. I'm delighted to host today a young friend of mine, Amir Adnani, who despite his young age, I've now done business with for almost 20 years. It is not true, in fact, we began doing business with him in diapers, but it is almost, in fact, the case. I'm absolutely delighted with the success that Amir has enjoyed for his own account because he's a superb human being. I'm, of course, happier yet for the money that he has made Sprott clients over the last 20 years. Amir, first of all, thank you for coming and welcome to Southern California.
Thank you very much, Rick. I'm delighted to be with you and humbled by your introduction. Thanks for having me.
You've been to several of the Sprott Vancouver symposiums, and you have listened to the Living Legends panel that I've done, which is how Know Who came about, where we interviewed the Robert Friedlands and the Lucas Lundins and the Bob Quartermains and the Ross Beatties of the world. But what we also want to do in this session is interview younger entrepreneurs who, despite the fact that they're substantially younger than my vintage, have already demonstrated investment success, but at the same time are likely to be able to offer up investment opportunities to other people for the next 20 or 30 years. Understand that this session is going to be as much about you, the lessons you've learned and the lessons that you can impart, as it is about the natural resource investing business in total. I notice that throughout my experience as an investor for 45 years now, many successes accrue to first-generation immigrants. So to begin with that, why don't we talk about your upbringing, how you came to North America, and how you think, your cultural background, your family background, and the experience of being an immigrant helped shape who you are as a human and as an investor?
Probably have to say that it's played, two aspects of it have played a critical role. One is probably having born into a very entrepreneurial family. My father is an entrepreneur, in fact, in Iran, where I was born in Tehran, was involved in a variety of businesses that he formed and developed. But having been born in Iran post-revolution, or just right before the revolution, but my childhood being during a time where you have the Iran-Iraq war, you have conflict, you have crisis, you have all sorts of issues from shortages and rations around electricity and water to nightly air raids, courtesy of Baghdad at the time. All of this, I think, just makes you appreciate, can't take anything for granted. And to come from a background that was fostered around entrepreneurship, about appreciating every little bit that life can offer, to end up in Vancouver, Canada. A 150-year-old country, but Vancouver in itself really being a young multicultural city that, as you know very well, is the epicenter of junior resource business and being an entrepreneur in that sector. I think the linkage between an upbringing that I described, coupled with landing in a city that is really has all the necessary resources to help foster the interest of someone that wants to be in the junior resource business as an entrepreneur and doesn't take anything for granted, really has served me well. And when I look back to this combination. It's something that I've noticed when you look at some of the people that you've done business with, like the Lundin family, even Friedland himself. I mean, they came from other parts of the world, but found Vancouver to be the right place to be able to bring together the human resources, the financial resources, the sponsorship to be in a business that, frankly, is a very high-risk business.
Would you suggest that there's any validity to the sense that a first-generation immigrant, particularly one whose family fled a war, has a healthy insecurity, has a drive that might be missing in third or fourth generation North Americans? Or do you think that's a misplaced sense of what makes so many immigrants successful?
I certainly don't hope that's the case, because being a father now to 3 kids and having a young family, my 3 kids were born in Vancouver, Canada, I'd like to think that my wife and I can do things in a way and raise these kids in a way where they're just as hungry as I am and she was, and that would be just as motivated. I'd like to think that. But at the same time, I can't help to think that there's definitely some truth to the fact that when you arrive in a brand new country where you don't speak the language and everything is new to you, you want to prove something. You really have a chip on your shoulder. You really want to show that not only can you prove something, but you really want to is this sense of eternal gratitude that you feel to this new community and society who's taken you in, where, again, where you're coming from may have been torn apart because of a revolution and a war and so on and so forth. And I mean, I really feel that way towards where I live in Vancouver, where you feel not only have you got to prove something, but you also have a lot to pay back. And that's the value add that you bring to the table with not only your business, but the community that you live in. I really like to think that I'll instill some sense of big drive and hunger in my kids as well. As to how I do that, I'm not sure, but you work on it as a parent all the time.
I want you to share with this audience the story that you shared with me yesterday, which might have something to do with a Persian cultural predisposition towards gold, or maybe something that happened inside your family. But I want you to talk about the gold coins that your grandmother originated into the family wealth, and tell the story about gold in Iranian currency and the role that gold has played in your own family.
Well, it may be a tradition or something that's not necessarily just unique to my family. I think you hear this in Indian culture as well. But in Iran, buying commemorative or just gold coins and having them be something that you would give as a present, but around special occasions, was something that was definitely in our family. My grandmother was really big on that, and the 2 events, and maybe 3 events that really kind of called for the gold coins to come out were the Persian New Year, birthdays, and graduation from each, as you finish grade 1 and you go to grade 2 and so on and so forth. And education was very important. And so these were key rewards that were at the end of it. And it's unbelievable to have these gold coins. In fact, as my family immigrated to North America, first to the US and then to Canada, always obviously had these, I had them with me, and my brother had them, and my mom and dad had them as well. And in recent years, I've been bringing them out and going through them and looking at them and talking to my own kids about it. And especially over the last year with the Trump administration pulling out of the Iranian nuclear accord that Obama had put in place, and seeing what has happened to the currency debasement of Iran, I couldn't help but to go back and just run the math. And the math simply is that whether you look at when I was born or the period during which my grandmother would have been buying these gold coins, and what the value of the Iranian currency was at the time to the US dollar, right, to a $200 an ounce gold price, relative, basically having gone from a 7-to-1 ratio, 7 Iranian tomans to $1, to now having gone to a ratio of almost 15,000. It was as much as 20,000 recently, to $1, and obviously to purchase $1,200 gold. It basically is disappearance of value altogether. Not talking about a percentage. It's 99.99% of the currency value has just been gone, and its purchasing power. And it's incredible, those gold coins, I look at them, my grandmother passed away a year ago, And I talk to my kids about that intrinsic value and the store of value. And I know you've spoken about it as being insurance, but the insurance coupled with the store of value. I mean, when people say those words, store of value, and I think about my own personal experience, and my mother now as a grandmother to my kids, and I think about, if she's using currency today to buy gold, right, how that would manifest and the math around that. I find that fascinating, and it's real, and it's something that, heck, even my 8-year-old and 10-year-old understand, and now they're asking for gold coins for their birthdays and Persian New Year. And I love that, right? Instead of buying them some plastic junk for various holidays or whatnot, it's a great thing to instill. To start talking about that currency and the concept of what a currency is meant to be at a young age. And I had that at a young age as well. And maybe, again, it's a function of being in a country and a society where there's turmoil, where there's total distrust of the system. Right. I think here we take comfort in the fact that, yeah, it's a democratically elected government and regime and whatnot. Nothing will ever be stolen from us, right? But people in Iran, I don't think then and now ever thought comfortable with the government.
It's interesting that you point that out. At Sprott, we probably serve the interest of 200,000 investors worldwide. Mm-hmm. And if you look where the greatest concentration of interest is among those customers, and you look for some way to subdivide interest or origin or something like that, older Jewish people.
World War II.
That went through World War II, right, or, have firsthand knowledge of that. Palestinians and Lebanese, Persians, Vietnamese, yeah, people that have been through really, really chaotic circumstances, get away from an academic understanding of gold and migrate towards a visceral understanding of gold. The other one, of course, which you're familiar with, having spent time since leaving in the Middle East, is the Indian subcontinent. You go to the gold souk in Dubai. Yeah. Those workers get paid every 2 weeks and go right down to the souk and buy physical goods
right away,
as quickly as they can. It's a very interesting circumstance. And I guess they would argue that they've been through plenty of traumatic circumstances, too.
It is about the traumatic experiences, for sure.
Right. Now, I want to get back to you and away from gold for a little bit, although we're going to get back to gold in a minute. So you came over, you were motivated. I know from a mutual friend of ours, Miran Katusa, that you were quiet, but you were a hell of a student. Okay. And he's a very smart guy. So if he says you were a hell of a student, you were a really, really, really good student. What did you choose to study in university? What were your motivations to study that? And was your course of study appropriate to what you became? In other words, did you actually put your university education, did you make the right decision?
I think yes and no. I mean, in the sense that for as long as I can remember, I've wanted to build businesses and be an entrepreneur. I mean, going back to, just following my dad into his office and just being there and observing this idea of, you're building something, and especially when he was very involved in the construction business. I think it's maybe easier when you kind of look up to a dad who's a businessman, but he's building something, and you can visualize what is being done, and so you say, this is what I want to do. So for me, the sense of entrepreneurship was very strong. I think to me, academics and university wasn't necessarily a means to an end. I wasn't going to university so I can become a practicing lawyer or accountant. I wanted to have some education under my belt, and I did a science degree at the University of British Columbia, and it's a fantastic university. You know a thing or two about it. It's top 25 in the world today, by the way. It's doing some amazing things, and to me, a science background again was not a function of becoming a practitioner, but I actually think, and I'll sort of say this to younger people as well. I think a science degree can sometimes be a better degree when interested in business than an MBA, in the sense that science really pushes you to think analytically.
Right.
And it's about problem solving. And I think about this all the time. Like my kids will say to me in the morning before I go to the office, well, Dad, what are you going to do today? Or what did you do today? And I always say, today I was problem solving. Every day is about problem solving. As a business person, you show up at work and the question is, what are today's problems going to be? And it could be human problems, it could be technical problems, it could be anything. And I feel that's where the background and the university sort of education that I got really kind of gave me 5 years of training and regiment into understanding how to think analytically, how to study and absorb a lot of information quickly and make sense of it and make decisions. And I think science is great for that. And for me, it's worked. And, you know, I think it's different for every person. But, and I'm still very involved with UBC, and as an organization, I love that connection as well that you create with the university and community, not just go there to get a degree. You know, I serve on the UBC Alumni Association board, and I try to get involved. I try to, you know, in a way, kind of, I think it's as much you get from an academic institution afterwards as the 4 or 5 years that you're in as well.
I'm certain that the IQ and achievement at the University of British Columbia escalated rapidly after they got rid of me. Your time was very, very good. I want to follow up on the science degree. One of the things that I found, certainly as an employer, is, first of all, it's easier to teach scientists and engineers business than it is to teach business people engineering, geology, and science. The other thing that I find with people with a technical background is that although they might not be able to get the empirical answer to a question, they know there is one.
Right.
Often people that have an arts degree or a business degree believe in the narrative more than they believe in the evidence. I don't know if you found that, A, with yourself, but B, with the people that you've hired, but I've certainly noticed that as an employer.
I've definitely noticed that with myself. I mean, empirical evidence, as you put it, is the key driver of having a more scientifically oriented mind, because for 4 to 5 years in a degree, when you pursue that, they hammer that in you, and so it becomes part of your framework of thinking.
I think the viewers also need to know that with regards to empirical processes, the probability that you're going to get a right answer is almost nil.
That's right.
But you're going to get closer than somebody who doesn't know that a right answer exists.
That's the key. That is the key point. That's actually the foundation of science that I really appreciate and try to point out to people. You know,
right. You ain't ever going to get it right.
That's right.
You got to try. So moving on now, we got what science degree was it?
A Bachelor of Science degree in biology and general sciences.
Right. So clearly, with that degree, you were going to go on and get a PhD and starve to death being a professor, or something else was going to happen. So we leave university, and we know an awful lot about cleaning test tubes and stuff like that.
That's right.
You show up in my life as a guy who's building websites for Luddites, me, and keeping them up despite your client's best efforts to crash them. How did you go from biology to websites?
I think the key again was that it was just a matter of time to finish that degree, get out, and start a business. That was it. And I think at the time, I remember I thought, you know what, in order to have a business, you can't just work from home. You needed a little office. It was $200 to get a little room down by Pender Street. And you know, just at the corner of where West Pender becomes East Pender is the farthest you can go, where the rent is still the cheapest, but you still get a West Pender address, which is right near where Tinseltown is in Vancouver. You're familiar with this.
Sure.
And in that room, myself and a couple of other guys who were both university grads with me from UBC, and we were interested in business and different ideas. And around the last year at university, we were building a website at UBC that was for college students, but kind of a peer-to-peer network. So that was some of the background behind what kind of led to the website development side of things. But long story short, you know, this was around the time of the fall of Enron and WorldCom. So there was almost this revolution around disclosure and continuous disclosure for public companies through a concept which seems really odd right now, but for the viewers, it wasn't that long ago where public companies didn't have dynamic websites where stock quotes and financial information and filings and all these things were instantaneously updated, right? So the concept really was around saying, you know, this is an emerging theme that public companies have very specific time-sensitive needs around disclosure. And to build a company that doesn't just build websites, but has specialized expertise and skills around understanding the needs of public companies could be a niche business. And especially in Vancouver, where we have obviously many publicly listed companies, as you know, this was the right foundation. That's how it started, that's how we met. And that company, which my younger brother runs, which Albert knows well, and you've met my brother a number of times, I know Amir Adnani, who's done a phenomenal job, in my opinion, building what is now Blender Media into a leading company that looks after the technical IT website, communication needs, basically, of public companies across Canada, from big ones to small ones, and to US as well. And then I think it was around 2005 that we got talking about uranium. And you put the uranium bug in my ear, and I think that's all she wrote.
Mm-hmm. Let's back up, though.
Okay.
There was an important part in the first discussion that I think that our viewers need to focus on. That was that you didn't pursue a course of business that you thought was cool or popular. As an entrepreneur, you identified a market need, and you identified a niche in the market need that you were qualified to fill. I betcha, I don't know, I betcha you were much more interested in the time, in the product, in filling the customer need, than you were in the size of the bill.
Yeah.
I just betcha that you made money by not focusing on money, but rather on the product. Is that accurate?
You're accurate, and the best test of that, I think, or testament to that, going back in time, is at the time we were just a startup. But by focusing on the product and the customer need, we went up. I remember this so clearly because it was also a milestone financing at the time. If you remember at the time, Wheaton River raised a bunch of money, which eventually became Gold Corp and whatnot. It was a big raise, and we went into bid for Wheaton's business, which was a big deal. Startup little company goes into bid for a company that at the time had raised $100 million, and it was a big deal. And we beat out the competition that was more established than us, had been around longer, better capitalized. We were just a startup company, but the customer liked what the focus on product was, and how it was geared towards what they wanted to buy and what their needs were, as opposed to us just giving them a widget that had been designed, but custom tailoring it. I still remember that. I remember the pitch. I remember how we went in and got that business. I remember our good friend, Nash Jua, and I don't want to put him on the record here, but we're having a nice kind of conversation. And I remember him even saying to me, "Are you sure you want to go up against these better capitalized companies?" And Nash, I'm in my early 20s. What do I got to lose?
That's right. Yeah. If you don't ask them, they've already said no, right?
That's right.
So moving ahead, all of a sudden we go from technology to uranium. That's kind of an odd leap. How did the entrepreneur go from technology to uranium?
Rick, you're just very effective at getting the right idea across, in the sense that when you started talking about uranium, and we discussed it in 2005, and you'd been bullish on it, I think, for a number of years leading up to that, and look, it was a very compelling case, and I think as an entrepreneur, I felt I was looking for the next challenge and opportunity. I was blown away by what I saw in the supply-demand situation with uranium. Timing just seemed right.
So, 500 people decided to go into the uranium business.
It was that much, yeah, it was crazy.
And a young Persian immigrant with a background in web design was one of the 5 that implemented out of 500. How did that happen? Why you? I mean, how did you get from there to here?
Hey, it goes back to one thing and one thing only. The people and the team that I was able to, and I was lucky enough to be able to convince that we should work together and be part of the group to make it what it was. I mean, you know how this works. This isn't about me or just one person, right? You're as good as the people you can attract. And I think what maybe the background that I had, maybe the science background, maybe the technology background, all of that really made me think that in order for us to build a Texas-focused company that's going to go permit projects and build projects in Texas, we can't just have people that just generally know uranium or generally know mining or generally know geology. We need people that are on the ground, expertise with that style of deposit, that area, that county, all of that. And I was very fortunate to be able to attract individuals with way more experience. I mean, the experience that I didn't have, they had. And they had just built a mine in South Texas. This was a privately held Mestina mine. And it was perfect, right? Because, I mean, it doesn't get better than that. They've just gone through the process of permitting, building, all those factors. And to me, it just felt like this is it. We can make this into the nucleus. It works. And that allowed us to execute fast and with speed, right? From 2005 to initial production in 2010. In 5 years, if it wasn't for the team, it would not have been possible.
So I'm glad that the 2 businesses that you're in, that your children have decided to collect gold rather than uranium. While, of course, you were building a successful uranium company over a few years, In a bear market, you've built the beginnings of a very successful gold company too. Tell me about the genesis of the gold company, how you decided to go into the gold company, and how you as an entrepreneur identified the niche in gold that you decided to pursue.
I think for me, it wasn't necessarily, it was being aware of various niches that we have in our sector that you've spoken about for many years, and the niches around being a prospect generator and or being a single asset explorer, being a developer, et cetera, being a royalty company.
Right.
And I think just recognizing that, look, you have to have a business model. You have to pick one of those business plans and basically see how well you can execute it. And I think just recognizing that a prolonged bear market was the right time to pursue the consolidation business model. I mean, if I had to stop right now and exit this business in terms of the mining business, and you said to me, what is one thing that really stuck with you from the beginning to the end, was listening to people like yourself and Ross Speedy talk about the Lumina copper experience. This idea that when Freeport-McMoRan and all the big copper guys thought nothing of these copper resources in the ground that were quote unquote out of money because they were uneconomic at the time, at the copper price back in 2000 or 2001 or 2, and that you can buy these things and just keep holding costs down, eliminate G&A. I mean, think about that. What we've done with gold mining is really just taking a play out of that playbook, but going out there, you saw my presentation yesterday, having acquired 5 or 6 different assets which were previously public companies,
right,
each with a separate set of CEOs, CFOs, board, G&A. Mm-hmm. Getting rid of all of it, reducing land costs, getting rid of royalties, negotiating things down. To me, it was just simply a recognition that that is the niche, and that niche about buying resources in the ground when no one else wants them because we're at such a low point in the commodity cycle, to me is the epitome of what we talk about when we talk about being in the resource business, being counter-cyclical, which means being a contrarian, and benefiting from work and dollars and energy that someone else has spent, and you can come in and basically buy it at a fraction of what the replacement value is. That just makes sense to me. And there's one aspect of this business that I really love. And so when you look at the gold, what we've done with gold and with building gold mining, I think it's just executing that to the teeth. I've said this to you before so many times. I'm in a way schizophrenic about whether I want the gold price to take off and rally tomorrow or not, because it's created such a wonderful window to be able to do this kind of thing.
Final question. I could do this all day, but final question. If you had to, which you will have to, talk to 15,000 or so viewers who are speculators in natural resources and give them a lesson, something that will help them perform as investors, that's a consequence of something that you've learned as an entrepreneur, as an investor, what would that be? What would be the most important lesson that you've learned in 15 years of being an entrepreneur and speculator that you can pass on?
This probably comes just from the fact that the first thing I'm going to say may stem from being in the uranium side of things, but you might argue it's the same for all mining, but things always take longer than you think. They always take longer.
So you're telling the speculator to have patience, is that right?
To have patience. I mean, I look at how many years it has been now since, let's say, the situation with the downturn in the uranium market, or getting permits, or being able to attract the right investors. The time it takes to attract quality, whether it's quality people or quality investors, always takes longer than you think. Patience, I think, is really key. And patience, I think, goes to the heart of being able to also be contrarian. Because you might be right about the fact that, let's say, the gold price is too low or not sustainable, or that 85% of uranium mines in the world are losing money, so this is not a sustainable picture. But somehow these things sometimes can last longer than you can. What's that old saying Greenspan had? Markets can stay irrational longer than you can
stay solvent.
Yeah. So I think patience is such an important part of it, I would say, for me.
So, ladies and gentlemen, wisdom from a young entrepreneur who's built $200 million plus enterprises from a standing start, coming from a war-torn homeland, not speaking the language of the society that he entered into. Amir, thank you so much for the interview. Thank you for your contributions to the wealth of Sprott clients, and we look forward to you doing so for at least 3 more decades.
Thank you very much, Rick.